Welcome everyone to Quick Moments and Passionate Pursuits, the Unfolding, where intuitively guided conversations are followed with feral faith, enthusiasm, and joy, bringing new insights, inspiration, and perspectives along the way. I'm your host, Beth Orr.
And Bridget Querns.
And today we're going to be talking to you about how we feel into our answers. Oftentimes our body gives us clues into what we're experiencing, and we're going to dive into that topic a little bit more today. So we're going to start with a discussion that we had recently that was really illuminating, and it's led to some other conversations where what happens is that oftentimes when we're faced with a problem or something that we're looking to make a choice on, we have this emphatic yes, where we know that we're going to do it. We have this emphatic no that says, heck no, I'm out of here. And we have this I don't know. And what's the I don't know mean? So we're going to dive into all aspects with that, and starting with the emphatic yes. Bridget, do you want to riff on the emphatic yes a little bit for you and what that experience is like for you?
Yeah, sure. So I've gotten more in tune with the way that I respond to things as I've grown in understanding and also as I've practiced meditation, because I think it's a lot easier to get in touch with the way that our body responds to propositions when we start from a place of stillness and peace. So when we are totally wrapped up in our circumstances and the day-to-day things and the rush and the hustle and the stress, it's really hard to hear what our body is trying to tell us because there's just so much outside noise. But when we bring it back in and ground ourselves and get ourselves operating from a more baseline place where there's stillness and there's quiet and we can hear our thoughts and we can feel our body speaking to us, then it's much easier to tune to how our body responds to things. So if I were to give an example of what an emphatic yes has been for me, I'll just go back to when I started this business. I had a very dear friend who I actually just had a conversation with today on the phone, and it was COVID and I was doing a whole bunch of inner work, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't want to just jump into another job that feels like I have to be there, because honestly, that almost killed me, and I don't want to go back down that road. So the next time I jump into a job or a business, it's going to be something that I know is 100% who I am and is emerging from the wholeness of the strengths that I possess and the gifts that I bring and the way that I want to serve other people. So she called and she brought up the realm of coaching. And she said, I know you. I know the conversations we have. I know how you get curious and you love asking questions. I think maybe you should consider becoming a coach. And my body immediately responded when I just said that just now. And the way that I feel it is there's this rising, expanding feeling. It's warm. It feels good. It feels a little bit excited, but I don't want anyone to rely too much on excitement, because I think we'll get into the discussion of how sometimes what we think is excitement is actually stress or anxiety around something, but it just feels really good. It's like putting on a wonderful, warm, comfortable piece of clothing and you're like, yeah, this feels great. So when she said that, and I really let it sink in, I had been doing a lot of the inner work in order to create that stillness. And I just said, yeah, that sounds right. And it was so right. It was such an emphatic yes that it took me just a couple months to get into a coaching program where I was going to get certified, credentialed, and to find a mentor and to form my LLC. They just were obvious next steps that were easy to take when I was working from a place of, this is an emphatic yes. It's like all systems go. So that was my experience with it. How about you?
Yeah, it's interesting. It brought up a lot of things for me. I took a lot of notes during that, because you're kind of talking about like there's this Short-term emphatic yes. Like
Mm,
this is this is like I want to have shrimp scampi for dinner. There's this short-term emphatic yes that's your absolutely yes right now, and then there's this long-term. What you were describing was is this purpose, this um, something in it resonates with multiple other aspects of who you are, right? It kind of like it's like missing pieces of something that it's like this piece of information, like the coaching. It was like you had all of these other parts of you that were illuminated and you were aware of, but there was this one missing piece. And once you had that missing piece, it was like, yes, now I know what to do with all of these others and how I move forward. So I think there's these short term emphatic yeses and there are these longer term emphatic yeses, which leads to just because it's right for you now, I think it's important to ask why it's right for you. Right.
mm,
And so sometimes we're coming from this really deep, intentional, spiritual place, like what you described as you're here to share your gifts and the gifts that you have. It made sense to you. This was an emphatic yes because it was a way for you to share your gifts in a sustainable way moving forward. And it resonated with you, right? But sometimes we have these emphatic yeses that we have to be aware of that can be for other reasons. Maybe
mm,
it's because of I just did an episode on blind spots, and so sometimes that emphatic yes is linked to um, past scripts. We are falling into it, and it's a yes because it's familiar. It's something
mhm,
that we're just used to. If I do this, then it leads to this, and this is always a good response, and that's a nice feeling. So I'm going to keep in that direction, but it doesn't mean that it serves the spiritual other part. So I think there's a little bit of I think as the older I get, the more I'm realizing that an emphatic yes is a yes, but it's still worth a pause to say, well, let me just double check and ask myself why, right? Let me see why it's a yes to make sure that it's in my, best interest. Like the other day I wanted to go somewhere for lunch and I knew it was going to take a couple of hours and I was like it was an emphatic yes for me to meet a friend and do that and then I was like well wait let me step back for a second. What am I working on? Is this thing that I'm working on more important? Ooh, maybe even there's a part of me that I'm a little stressed. Maybe I'm trying to escape this for a second to take a little bit of a break.
mhm,
Sometimes we're escaping and it's a good idea just to get some perspective. But other times it's like, no, I need to double down and I need to do this. So it's that discernment of why you're having the emphatic yes
mhm.
before you jump into yes, right?
Yeah, that's super valuable. I like to say that when we're calling something in or manifesting something, we get to work on the what and why. That's something that we get to talk about. We get to say what it is that I want that would bring me joy and fulfillment and why I want that and really work through that before we just kind of flippantly place the order. And then the pieces that come from the response, the universe or God, are the when and the how.
Mhm.
So I think that can be used here also. If I get an emphatic yes and I check in with my what and my why, and I'm asking, okay, why am I responding to this in this way? And what is it bringing me, or what is it bringing me away from?
Mhm.
And then go from there. It's just the danger is just when we've been so conditioned to suppress or not listen to that immediate gut response because it is immediate and it is fleeting and it
Yes.
will go away. So if we say, no, I'm not listening, I'm not interested in this right now, or we get a no when we say, I don't care, I'm doing it anyway, then we've started conditioning and training ourselves not to put any sort of value or what is the word I'm looking for? Emphasis or I don't know, on that immediate. response.
Mhm. Like we don't give it the
So
credibility that it
that's the
yeah.
word. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome. That reminds me of, when we started this journey on the podcast, and we were having that discussion of, we knew that we were supposed to be working together. We both felt like we were supposed to be working together in some way, but we didn't know how, right?
Yeah.
And once we discovered, like when we were talking about podcasts, it was like an emphatic yes. Now that's an
Mm-hmm.
emphatic yes that has no real deep understanding of why, but
Mm-hmm.
yet everything, it was like what you were describing. It wasn't anxiety, it was definitely excitement. It was like something in me started bubbling up and was like, yes, that makes so much sense. um but I just knew it was the right answer, and I needed to do it. And you've said this many times, and it resonates with me, where it was like we both felt like we couldn't say no,
Yeah.
because saying no felt so wrong that we didn't have to understand why it was yes, but we knew it wasn't no, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes it's as clear as no isn't it, and yes seems right, but we don't know why, right? And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
where
That's a
it's like,
really good example. Mm.
yeah, and then that kind of leads to, and certainly we can vacillate back and forth to the emphatic yes again, but it also leads me to an I don't know example along the
Mm-hmm.
same lines, where when I was wanting to do my own podcast. Now you've had your own podcast in place since I think October, right? This last
Yep.
year. And I've had a podcast that I wanted to do for 3 years. Literally, the number of recordings I have um, is ridiculous. It's like archives at this point that are never going to get heard, even by me probably. But but when I really got down to, you and I were, at we were in Gorgeous State Park, and we were at this.
You said it
We
right.
laughed because I was like, Gargus? And, yeah, anyway, it's a whole story about what state park this is. But we were at Gorgeous State Park, and there was this moment where Bridget's over here and she's, paying attention to her own things. And I'm over here like writing and journaling by the water. And I'm asking myself, because of this discussion of emphatic yes, emphatic no, and I don't know, what's the podcast? My podcast.
Mm,
Because I was like, our podcast is an emphatic yes. Wait, my podcast is an emphatic yes too. But we're jumping and going and have 4 episodes, and I still don't have an episode, or I have my episode recorded, but I don't have it posted. So wait, this is an emphatic yes. So why am I not moving forward? So sometimes
mm,
we have an emphatic yes, and it's like clear, no barriers, go. And in our situation, there was 2 of us. So it creates some momentum. And for me, if I'm responsible to somebody else, I'm going to do something and not talk myself out of it. Right. I'm always going to
mm,
show up for somebody else. Myself, I'm a work in progress to showing up for myself. Um, but what I realized is it was an emphatic yes, but it was fear, right?
mm,
There was a whole number of reasons why I was afraid. And there was something about just knowing that that's what it was. I had to move forward, right? It gave me
yeah.
courage to move forward, because I was like, well, I'm not the kind of person who allows fear to stop me. And knowing that I'm not the kind of person who allows fear to stop me, and it's an emphatic yes, everything's figure outable, right? And just do it,
Mm,
figure it out, right? So there's
yeah.
something too, I think you can have an emphatic yes and not know why you're not moving forward. And once you discover why you're not moving forward, it creates a receptivity and openness to finding a way.
Mhm. Yeah. So then in the realm of the I don't know or the I can'ts, because this is something that I've worked on with my kids for a while now. Anytime they say I can't to me, I challenge that statement. For a number of reasons. Number one, because if it's genuinely something that they don't feel safe doing or don't want to do or refuse to do, which is fine, I want them to have the courage to be able to say, no, I'm choosing not to do this because I don't want to and it doesn't feel right. And stand on that. Because I can't is kind of a weak response, but no, I'm not is really strong. So I want them to be able to make that discernment. Am I saying I can't because I don't want to? And if I don't want to, do I need to put a really clear boundary here that protects me and keeps me safe? So that's one reason. And the other reason is a lot of times we say I can't or I don't want to because we're afraid to. And when we're afraid to, when we're saying I can't or I don't want to, sometimes those things are actually emphatic yeses, and they're so emphatic that we're like, if I do this thing and I fail, then I don't even know who I am as a person because this thing is so right for me that I'm scared out of my mind about it.
Mhm.
So I want to cultivate in them the courage to be able to say, it's not I can't, it's that I actually think I can. And I'm more afraid of the fact that I can
Yeah.
and that it might work than I am of actually even trying to do it.
Mhm. Or it's also, I think, additionally, it gets into failure, right? It gets into, well, what if my can't means, what happens if I'm not good at it, or it doesn't work out, or I fail?
Mhm.
How does that then translate to me, yourself? Like,
Yeah.
affect your ability to believe in yourself moving forward? How does it, we're just trying to protect ourselves. I say this a
Hmm.
thousand times in a week, like we're just biological organisms, just trying to protect ourselves, keep ourselves safe here. And so when we say we can't, it's our body just trying to make sure that we're okay. There's some part of us, like you said, the fear response that says, no, 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 like we're not going to fail at this. We're not going to do this. We're not going to be ridiculed. We're not going to be cast out of the group that we're in. We don't want, like your kids, we don't want mom to think that, this, that, or the other, right? Like there's all
Yeah.
these things, but it also comes down to the unknown of change, right? We're so used to the success of what we're doing. We know how to do things, like, and when we start to do something else, and I can't is, I don't know what direction, like if I do this, it doesn't mean this anymore. If I
Mm,
do this, it doesn't even mean that. I don't even know what this means anymore. If I do, like, I have so little to pull from. Or even worse, when I was younger and I pulled on that, I got hurt.
yep.
So I've talked before about like that trauma cord. Sometimes there's a direct, like it's only the second time something's happened from a trauma in the past. So even though it's 30 years ago, you're tugging on a cord that's got a direct response to something that's traumatic. And there's so much risk involved in it. So that change, you're expecting a different outcome, but you're really like, you're only going to be going to 50% because 100% of the time it was something bad. And if it works out this time, it's 50%, but the risk of it still being 100% is linked to a really damaging cord,
Hmm.
you know? So
That's
understanding,
where,
yeah.
yeah, that's where it's really good to cultivate the pause. Like it's okay. Like the house is not going to burn down if I hit pause right now and check in.
Mhm.
It's okay to take time to make decisions. And when we know each other really well, like we had a second in a conversation a couple days ago where we know each other really well. Sometimes we know that we're going to hit pause because we need to for ourselves, but also the responsible thing to do is to say, I need to take a pause for myself right now. Not that I'm saying I'm ghosting you or I don't want to talk to you or anything else. Before you read into this differently, I need to take a pause and check in.
Mhm.
And it's always okay to hit pause and check in. In fact, maybe it would be a good idea to do it more of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah. I
Yeah, I
also
think,
don't want to, yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I also don't want people to miss the part of this discussion where it's an I don't know, and that I don't know is actually either a no, because it wasn't an emphatic yes, or a not yet. So the not yet leads into this. If I pause right now and check in with my what and my why and see where this fits, maybe it's just that I don't have the emotional bandwidth for this right now.
Mhm,
Or I really want to do this, but I don't have the time and the energy to devote to doing it well. And it's something that I'm not going to do unless I do it really well.
mhm.
So if we were to jump in and go with the yes, when we get the I don't know, we may be doing a disservice to something that we actually really want to say yes to.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I don't think I said this yet, but that's what when I'm thinking about the emphatic yes, I know it's yes, and sometimes I try to discover why, and then there's the emphatic no, which definitely means no, but then there's the I don't know, which still has no in it, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't know has a K-N-O-W instead of an N-O, but the N-O is still in the middle of the word. And so it just means I don't like it means no right now until I get more information so that I can make this
Mm-hmm.
decision. But it's wise, like you said, to figure out the nuances of that. And it doesn't mean it could swing to I don't know. It swing to an emphatic yes, or it can swing to an emphatic no. But it's not clear. All the pieces of the puzzle aren't together. It's
Mm-hmm.
like your coaching decision probably had an I don't know for a long time. It's probably not that you never thought about coaching. It's that you didn't
Mm-hmm.
have enough elements of all of it until like the time that your friend brought that up and said coaching. It was like all of a sudden you had everything else you needed, and then it was like the last little piece, and you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
coaching. It wasn't like you were like you just took your friend's advice. So, like it was a whole bunch of things had to come into place for that to be an emphatic yes for you. It was just the final.
Mm-hmm.
So the timing of something based
Yeah.
upon what we know is really important at that particular time. But it's also, as we've talked, it's a mind, body, and spirit experience, this response. Like tuning in, there's some place, like an emphatic yes to me may feel in a different part of my body than it does to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so it's so important when we've experienced something as a yes or a no to know where we feel it first, because it's such a clue before
Yeah.
we have words for it. Like sometimes, like the other night, I was nauseous. I never get nauseous, and I was nauseous, and I was like going through. It's like, have I had my vitamin? Like, what is this? I'm going through. Did I eat something? And I was like, oh, it's this thing that I'm thinking about, right? And I was like, oh, that's just telling me to tune in. That's like my mind going, that's my body telling me, hey, there's something to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Like you just need to think about this a little bit, pause, right?
Yep.
But there's somewhere in our body that things come up for us that are clues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that, because that's saying that we can respond to things that we're not even aware in the moment we're responding to, until we check in and ask where it's coming from. And again, I don't like to bring up systems or things too often, because they don't always work for everyone. But something that does work really well for me is understanding my human design. And in my human design, my strategy as a manifesting generator is to respond. So I
Mm,
am constantly in a responsive state to things that are coming up, whether I'm consciously aware of them or not. So it's almost guaranteed when I'm feeling something that I'm actually responding. And if I check in and go, okay, what am I actually responding to right now? Then I get the information I need to move forward.
mm,
You're describing a similar experience, and I know you're also a manifesting generator. So that makes sense, because you're just asking, what am I responding to?
mm,
And then you get the information. Other people are going to have a different experience of that. Some people, They're initiators. They don't respond to anything. They send out the signals. Some people are wait to be invited. There's just so many different ways that we can process information. So I think it's really helpful, even if you're not interested in human design, to ask yourself, how do I process information? And just check in with it.
And I think a question then comes up to me is, do we have the safety around us that allows for us to pause,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
As a responder, oftentimes, there's a desire to immediately respond. I mean, that's a trait that in leadership, when I was a leader, um, that I was responsive. I was like, okay, we've got this going on. It's got to be done in 24 hours. Let's do this thing, right? And that gets cultivated. And it aligns with and falls into who I am as a human being. And so
Mm,
but there is there's a moment where sometimes we feel something in our body, and there's just this little, and the question is given my surroundings, given the situation that I find myself in, am I able to pause for a second? Is it safe to pause? Because sometimes if we pause, it can come across to our people or an environment as a lot of different things. And we can be attacked, we can be made to feel weak. I mean, there's all these different ways that people can respond to us in that pause that doesn't allow for us to feel safe. And then that can push us into making decisions that aren't the best for the situation
mhm.
because of the necessity of the environment that we're in.
That's excellent. You made me think back to a time. So I have a decade of classroom teaching experience, and I frequently, this is so interesting looking back at it with this lens now, because I would frequently not make a plan for that class until the class entered the room that day. And
Mhm.
it wasn't that I wasn't planning ahead the material or what we wanted to cover or what needed to get done. It was that you could have the best plan for a class. And if that class comes in and they're exhausted from the really difficult discussion they just had in Mr. So and so's class, and they're not ready to do the thing that you had planned, then I had to be responsive enough to say, I'm scrapping my plans and we're going with something else. There was one day that I had a class walk in my classroom, and I looked at them and I felt the energy and I said, put away your stuff. We're meditating today. And we
Mm,
closed our eyes and we did a 40-minute guided meditation. And afterwards, I had students saying to me, I needed that so badly today, and I didn't even know.
mhm, mhm.
It's just, it's so valuable to be able to cultivate the capacity to respond in ways that are needed, even when no one is able to verbalize that that's what's needed.
Yeah.
So, as a leader, as someone who is working with other individuals, it's so valuable, and we don't talk about this enough, to cultivate these things. These are tools that are applicable in every situation and area of our lives. And they can make us better humans. They can make us better relators. They can make us better members of community when we really lean into them and see the value in them and trust them.
That's what you're bringing up is probably another element of this, that it's probably less on a one-on-one, like with yourself kind of way, but what you're bringing up is this invisible energetic frequency and field that's between us. And so what you did
Mhm.
was, when you had a decision to make about what you were going to do and how you were going to move forward, you read the room, right?
Yep.
But reading the room means that, what people look at that as, they say that people are empaths.
Mm,
And it suggests that some people have the capacity to feel other people's feelings and other people don't. But what it also insinuates is that the people who don't, it's almost like because I look at that as like a sixth sense, like it's part of all of our capacity. So it's not like you're born, it's like when you're born blind, you either have the capacity to see or not. And when you're deaf, you either have the capacity to hear or not, right?
Mm.
But we're now determining ways to help people do workarounds with some of these things because we understand it more. And with this empathic response and this ability to read energy, everybody has the capacity and everybody is doing it. They don't know
Yeah.
they're doing it. And so
Yeah.
what you were doing was is you were reading the room and you were negotiating because you were in a position of power. You were negotiating the needs of the room and you took that initiative to make that shift, right? You took that social
Mm.
responsibility to make that shift. But so many times people aren't attuned to their capacity. This is the friction that we feel when you're in work. I'm sure you can think of this too, where you have this person that you're always kind of like, it's like this. Why is it so hard? Right? You're you're not reading the emotional frequency and energy between you. And because it's
Mhm.
not being named, but it exists, it makes that a confusing interaction.
Oh my
And
gosh,
it,
can I add a layer on this too?
yeah, yeah,
Something I've experienced that I have a lot of trouble with as someone who is attuned to this is when the individual with whom I'm interacting says one thing, but energetically is projecting something completely different. And honestly, I've come to know that they might not even be aware they're doing it. They really think that what they're saying is true. And there's no discussion that I can have with them that would convince them otherwise. And that makes interactions really tough for me with those
yes,
individuals. And
yes,
there's nothing that
absolutely.
they're doing wrong.
No, it's actually what I just talked about, which is a blind spot, right?
Yep.
It's the inability of somebody to understand the nuances and the depth of what's happening within them, right?
Yep.
And so we're operating this script that says this is true. So when we think something is true, then we don't look for anything in opposition to that. We look for things to feed the evidence that this is true. So our lens is such that we're like, oh, well, if my truth is truth, then their behavior is being filtered through that lens. So this behavior must mean that, and this behavior must mean that.
Hmm.
When really, if there was a receptivity of, I don't know what's happening here. I don't even know. Like, I don't know what kind of script I've got going on. I don't even know my lens right now. Right. But what you're describing is that affects our ability to accurately know our emphatic yes and no and our I don't know because we're skewed by a lens that isn't fully integrating all of our truth, right?
Yeah.
So when we have this inner truth, sometimes we can't even be honest with ourselves.
Yep.
And I just talked in this episode that I was working on about confabulations, which Brene Brown
Mm.
describes as the story that we're telling ourselves. So we will in an interaction like you described, like when we're talking about these two individuals that have differing opinions and they're struggling to see eye to eye, a confabulation is I will come up with a solution or an explanation for what's happening that keeps my lens intact and that gives me the least distressing
Mm.
understanding of the situation. So it's not producing me stress because I'm comfortable if I realize that you're just a jerk and you don't understand, right? I don't have to change. And it gets back to that I can't, like you were talking about. I can't is I don't really like the emotion in me is so strong right now. I'm going to have to change if I address the reality of this being something different. And I may actually have to say I'm sorry or to do something different or take responsibility. And we don't know for that human being in front of us what apologizing or taking responsibility has meant in their life to them,
Yep.
right? It could be that that has presented a lot of harm to them by being wrong.
Hmm.
There's no margin for error.
Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, the best thing that we can do is just, if we're hearing this information and we're recognizing that maybe our capacity isn't fully developed, or we'd like to make that a sense that is more strong within us, then we take the steps to do the work and to show others how it can be done. And I think that that would be something that we would be able to tackle here, as we talked before about, well, how can someone put this into practice? How
Mhm.
can they feel what we're talking about right now so that they can start developing this muscle?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think everybody's entry point is going to be slightly different. I think one of the things that probably you've noticed that I've noticed on my journey is if we're experiencing a very similar experience with being confused or disoriented about what's in front of us, for example, if I tune into my intuition and I start cultivating, like, where do I begin? Where I begin and what the universe submits to me might be a different beginning point than it is for you.
Mhm.
I've been rooted to books and like I was talking to somebody the other day where I was like listening to what they were going through and where they were at. And I said, well, I mean, here's my offerings. Here's what I could do. But I'm also gonna give you like, here's some other resources. Here's some other people I know that are doing some things. Here's some books or podcasts that I would recommend. Um, I think the important thing is to go where you can go and it doesn't cause so much stress that it shuts you down.
Mm.
Sometimes we try to fire hose healing, and I think it fire hoses us when we try to fire hose healing, right? So it's like, what's the next piece of information that I can understand about myself that seems approachable?
Mhm.
Because it's a what you're describing is a process to our awareness and application in our lives. It's not an
Mm.
episodic, like, I'm going to tackle this and I'm going to deal with this and then it's going to be better. It's
Yeah.
so aggressive, when you look at it that way. It's like the feminine and masculine kind of approach to healing.
I'm just charting back how I got to where I am now, because where I am now is not where I would suggest someone start. But when I first started this, I found it really helpful just to write down what I was feeling in a journal
Uh-huh.
or voice memo it or whatever I needed to do that worked, but document it somewhere. Because even though I wasn't ready to say it out loud or to bring it up or to talk about it with someone or to tackle the areas where I was feeling discontent or discombobulated head on at the time, I was like, well, if I can just start working this muscle, that the right thing for me right now feels like just honoring what I'm feeling and putting it out there somewhere,
Yeah.
even if no one ever sees it. Now I'm at the place where if I feel something, I don't like sitting in a place where something doesn't feel right to me. I refuse to do that
Yes.
because I know that it settles in places in my body and then causes all kinds of other things to happen. And I'm not willing to let that happen. So when I feel something that doesn't feel right and it's uncomfortable,
Mhm.
my place now, my right step now is radical honesty. And it's either with myself or with someone else who I know we're both feeling that area of confusion. That's not always received really well. So it's not the place I'd suggest someone start, because if you start flexing that muscle and you get really sore really fast, you're not going to want to keep doing that. So yeah, find what feels right for you as a good starting place, I would suggest.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing up the point of safety again, right? So given assessing the either the individual or the situation in front of you, certainly in our own households, it can be different safety over others. And so when you think about this, like I think about like a situation that I had in a work setting at one point, and I had a person who I had been having a difference of opinion with how he would handle a situation, and it was for years. We had been trying and we had been trying to handle this, but what happened was is eventually the stress and the discomfort of the situation, like what you described, like eventually it gets so stressful that it's like, okay, I either have to leave for my emotional well-being. So I think, applying some of this is knowing when you've done everything that you can do and you can leave, and you need to leave for your own well-being, or that you are going to approach this in a different way. So I wrote the other day about how I was at the beach and I was heading on my bike to the beach and it started raining. And I was like, oh, I better go back and wait till the rain passes. Well, 10 minutes later, I was sitting there. I was like, I wonder if there's any other way that I can go to the beach. And the radar said that there was any other way that I could go to the beach and get there. But I couldn't go the one way I was trying. And so sometimes we have to find a different way. And in the situation that I'm describing with my colleague, I eventually got a third person involved. I asked for that third person to be a mediator. I asked if this person was okay with this person being a mediator. We went to a safe space that was not some place that was on either one of our turf. And we had a conversation with a person who we both trusted so that we could see an expanded lens and we could hear each other more so that we got out of our scripts that were well defined, which was so illuminating, right? Just so illuminating.
Sorry, we have children running around in the background. So
It's okay.
it's just is what
It
it
is what
is.
it is.
Um, yeah, so the one thing that I really wanted to make sure that we did during this episode was give someone a takeaway that they can work with. So do we want to give them a tool that they could use to start feeling into this?
Mm. I think for me, the one transferable, no cost thing that people can do is what you said, which is to utilize a journal, like journaling and self reflection. But that means tuning into the body.
Mm-hmm.
So starting to, for me, I started by kind of cataloging. I'm an organizer. So I started saying, where do I feel things in my body? So as soon as
Mm-hmm.
possible after I was experiencing something, allowing myself to get a moment to tune in, because I tend to, now I will say, if I am anxious, I might feel it in my stomach, but I also might feel it in my shoulders. So I'll get tension. I know other people who get headaches. And so the question is what are the one, just start with one place, but what are the multiple places? Do you feel anxiety in your chest? Do you start to have trouble breathing? Asking yourself when you're experiencing something, where do I feel it in my body? And then eventually getting to what's the emotion. And sometimes I have to step back and say, if I can't attach the emotion to what I'm feeling, if I were to, if somebody else were coming to me and they were to tell me the situation, what would I presume that they may be feeling? Because sometimes just that
Mm-hmm.
one step difference
Yep.
gives me a wide, like I'd be like, well, it could be this, and it could be this, and it could be this, and oh, put that list down and ask yourself, are you feeling any of these things? Does this resonate with you?
Mm-hmm.
And have it be kind of a hypothesis, a working hypothesis, because it's not necessarily always going to be that, but it's like you're basically cultivating your understanding of what you're experiencing.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's so good. As a coach, I experience this like I'm in a group mentor coaching program right now. So I get to coach, I get to be coached, and I get to observe great coaching.
Mm,
And it's really fascinating what comes through my head in each of those different roles. So if I am coaching like I was yesterday, I'm really in the moment, I'm really present, I'm not thinking about anything else. But then it's so great to have a group of coaches watching that interaction and being able to suggest when you said this, I might have said this, or I might have asked it this way. when we're not the person in that seat, we see and hear so much more. And it's the same thing with trying to figure out what's going on in our bodies and what we're feeling. Just take yourself out of the seat. If your best friend came to you and said, I'm feeling this right now and I really need help, what would you say to them? What would you ask them? And removing yourself just like you said, one step or even two. If you were observing you and your best friend having that conversation, then what would you be thinking?
Mhm.
And each of those steps back, it's like the way that I picture it is when you're in an airplane and you're on the tarmac and you can
Mhm.
only see out your window. I get really motion sick, by the way, at that point, because I can't see where we're going. I can only see
Mhm.
what's flying by my window. That's a really limited point of view.
Mhm.
But when you get up and you start climbing and the whole city lays out beneath you, you're like, oh, I'm seeing the relation of where that lake is in how I would get from that lake to that house. And now it just becomes so much more clear. And it's the same thing stepping back from
Mhm.
being really intimately involved in a situation and trying to make a decision. It does the
Mhm.
same thing.
Mhm. Yeah, and along those same lines, I would say, you talking about kind of taking a step back. I think sometimes people feel like they don't have permission again to pause, not
Mm-hmm.
just because of safety, but because of time constraints, because of expectations. And I would say the more we can cultivate our ability to communicate why we need to pause, it's okay sometimes not to know what you need or what's going on, as long as you can explain that you need a moment to figure it out and the consequences to not being able to have that time. Like I've had people before say, I need a moment, but I'm going to be back in 15 minutes. I just need to get a little distance and context to this. And if I respond now, I'm going to give you an answer that's like not accurate. And I'm like, oh well, I don't want
Yeah.
an inaccurate, why are we having that conversation? It really helps me understand how your brain thinks if it thinks differently than mine, right? Um,
Yeah.
or I remember one time in an organization that I was working in, I said, if I respond within the next 2 hours like you want me to, I'm not going to know this answer and this answer and this answer. So I'm going to be giving you a answer that only has about 20% of the lens of this problem. So it's probably going to be wrong, but it'll be the best answer we can give at this point. But I just want you to know it's probably not going to be that good. And then they get to decide if they get your semi appropriate answer or not in the line of sight, but at least you're pausing enough or giving the parameters of the scope of which you're answering.
Thank you so much for bringing this up because this is my number one biggest sticking point all the time in so many different situations. But I mean, I'm expecting a response from someone, and they said they would email me by this point and nothing. And I send them a message and nothing. And I call them and nothing. And there's no communication as to why communication has broken down. I don't need to know your answer. That's fine. But I really need you to communicate to me why you're taking time, why you're not responding. I'm going to read into it along the trauma cords that I have.
Yeah.
And those trauma cords are going to say that I did something wrong. You're upset with me. And that I'm going to devalue myself in that interaction, even if that's nothing to do with what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And I recognize that I'm going to do that. And I see that that's not healthy for me. So I work on that in the meantime. But it sure helps a heck of a lot when we can communicate that we need space and time.
Yeah, yeah, I see a lot of suffering in workplaces, or I've seen a lot of suffering in workplaces around that kind of lack of, like, people will get into a lack of respect. This person doesn't respect me, or this person, and you'll get like you don't know either. Like, there's been times that I've been like, I don't know, I think they're just busy. I don't think it's anything to take.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've run my own trauma cord and in organizations, and then that, like, I've been suffering. We suffer in that, and then somebody comes back around, they're like, hey, I just thought about you today. I'm so sorry. Like, I had this and this going on. I completely forgot about you. I can't believe I didn't make a note. Hey, do we still need to talk about this? Where are we at?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding?" I've been like suffering for days, because of what we read into it and those confabulations, those scripts that we
Yeah.
run.
Yeah.
And again, that's the social responsibility to work on ourselves and try to have that self-awareness, but also other people's social responsibility to do no harm,
Mm,
especially in workplaces,
yeah.
so, well, not especially in workplaces, but in workplaces too. So,
Anywhere where we're in community with other individuals and we could potentially affect them with our action or inaction, I think
yeah,
it's something to consider. Yeah.
yeah. The last thing before we kind of wrap up, I do want to mention we've kind of talked about the I don't know and the emphatic yes, but we really haven't talked about the emphatic no. And I
Mm-hmm.
do just want to mention a couple of things about that. For me, when I get an emphatic no, that is right for me. There is something that it's not safe to do this. It's not aligned with my values or my purpose, or it's a distraction to my path. Sometime an emphatic no, it can be a lovely idea, but it's not for me, right? And so oftentimes it's like explaining to people who really, really are in, like if you're their emphatic yes, explaining to them why. It gets into that communication of why, what your line of sight is, what all of these parameters are, because you have a different lens than them. And so I think recognizing that it's just your line of sight. Um, the only time an emphatic no that I get concerned is as if when I feel it, I don't feel relief. When I have an emphatic no and I'm like, yes, that's an emphatic no, because I feel lighter, right? When I get there. But when I have an emphatic no, that is anxious. That is anxiety. There is a fear lens and there is a love lens. There is a light lens and there is a density lens. And that density and that heaviness is on the fear cord, and love is light and, expansive. And so when I say no and it makes me feel light, it's right. And when I say no and it brings up all of this emotion, I need to dig in. I need to figure out what this is about, because I don't even know what it is. If it's a yes, no, or I don't know. Right.
Yeah, that's excellent because that surfaces in the emphatic yes and in the emphatic no. And it depends kind of how we've been conditioned or how we've programmed ourselves. So I may get an emphatic yes that I'm saying yes to because I'm anxious about saying no.
Mhm.
And that emphatic yes feels really heavy. And then I know it's not right.
Mhm.
And then I may get the emphatic no, and I'll feel a little bit of sadness around that. And it doesn't feel relieving. And
Right.
so, yeah, man. So, of course, as with any conversation we have, it's not clear cut and dry. It's
No, it's
not,
not.
here's the answer. This is it. It's so shaded and tinged that the best thing that anyone can do is listen more to themselves.
Mhm. Yeah. Which is why you have
Scylla,
pause.
pause. Yep. It literally is a musical instruction. So you would have seen this written in, it was written in the Psalms all the time.
Mm,
But it was a note to a musician who was playing music. It's like a rest in music.
mm,
I love it more and more the more I dig into this because I'm like a word nerd. But I dig into the meaning behind this and I'm like, it feels so good when you're listening to like one of your favorite songs and there's a pause in the music and you're like, oh my gosh, here it comes. And
yes.
it's the anticipation of what's coming after that pause that is like the best thing. And then that chord hits, and I've got goosebumps all over me right now because it's like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh,
Yeah.
that pause made the music. And what
Yes.
was there? nothing.
Mm,
Expansive, open, nothing. Hmm.
we're doing a whole
So many
episode on that.
goosebumps.
We're gonna do a whole episode on that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I have nothing more to say.
Well, a special thank you to Asheville artist Melissa Moss for our cover art. You can learn more about her at melissamossart.com. And of course, thank you so very much to Cloud Cult for our intro and outro music. You can learn more about them at cloudcult.com. And oh my goodness, thank you for listening. And until next time, friends, peace, love, and light.